It's the most dramatic event in the Arab uprising, a genuine revolution. Colonel Gaddafi's 40-year tyranny no longer even extends to his own garden. The rebels stormed into the dictator's compound, but of the man himself, there is no sign. Last night, his son and heir apparent was blustering defiance. Tonight, he's history, his toys, the trophies of victorious rebels. What is to be done with the architects of a regime which plundered a country? Lise Doucet is in Tripoli for us as celebrations begin in the newly renamed Martyrs Square. And where does this leave the rest of the Arab world? We'll hear from Libyan opponents of Gaddafi, from NATO and from the US State Department. Around 4 o'clock this afternoon, Colonel Gaddafi and one of his sons telephoned the Russian president of the International Chess Federation. Gaddafi claimed to be in Tripoli. "We will fight," he said nonchalantly. An hour later, the rebels had fought their way into his compound in the heart of Tripoli, and he was nowhere to be seen, nor indeed was a single member of his famous bodyguard of revolutionary nuns. On the cusp of autumn, the Arab Spring had claimed its most dramatic prize. Lise Doucet is there for us tonight. Lisa, Colonel Gaddafi's not been captured, but does it feel as if it's over?
Well, and I'm quite sure he's not playing chess tonight, Jeremy, because he must be very unhappy about the scenes that have literally exploded in the centre of this capital, the newly renamed Martyrs Square. It's where he himself used to appear by surprise and address his people and talk about the revolution, thank the masses for their support. And look at it tonight, the crowds of people who have gathered there to celebrate what they see as the end of more than 4 decades of his highly personalized, bizarre and brutal hold over this country. The revolution, the green revolution for those people is dead. And you see the sound, the gunfire in the air. This city has been resonating to the sounds of gunfire and other ordnances being fired off for several hours now. I have to say that that's not the scene right across the city of 2 million people, because it's also a city of fear and uncertainty, and there is still fighting in some areas.
So there are some areas still held by Gaddafi loyalists then?
Yes, indeed. My colleagues were down, just came back from the compound that was taken earlier today. They were warned by the rebels they should leave because there were still some fighting on the streets around the compound. Gaddafi loyalists were still putting up resistance. We've been traveling through this country for the past 48 hours, and there were roads we could not take. We were told there was fierce fighting, again, between fighters of Colonel Gaddafi and some of the rebels. In other areas, there were said to be negotiations between the two sides. So the battle isn't over, but certainly the days are counted, and there's not much time left before a new kind of leadership will take charge. But Libyans tell us they can't truly celebrate until they know where Colonel Gaddafi is and that his reign is well and truly over.
And I suppose it's too early to talk in any detail about what happens next.
Well, the next step will be, and we hear from Benghazi, which is the headquarters of the National Transitional Council, the rebel council.
Well, evidently we have some problem with the satellite connection there. So tonight it's a return to scenes of jubilation for the rebels on what started for them as an unpromising morning. Battle for control of the capital, Tripoli, is the last act in a bloody 6-month struggle, with Gaddafi's compound their new prize. Gabriel Gatehouse reports on how the day unfolded.
More than 48 hours after rebel forces swept into Tripoli, the battle for the capital continues. The pendulum of confidence has swung wildly from the opposition to forces loyal to Colonel Gaddafi.
We are going to win because the people are with us.
And then back again. Not for the first time, an over-hasty victory has been predicted.
For the Gaddafi regime, this is the final chapter.
But so far, the colonel himself is nowhere to be seen.
If you know, let me know. We don't know. I don't have a clue.
He wasn't in his compound when rebel forces overran it this afternoon. But these scenes must surely be the biggest blow so far to Colonel Gaddafi's 4-decade grip on power. The toppling of statues is the traditional accompaniment to the fall of a dictator. This one represents an American fighter jet, a symbol of the colonel's defiance, built to commemorate a US airstrike in 1986. The base at Bab al-Azizia is of huge strategic and emotional value to the regime. It was from here that Colonel Gaddafi took his stand against the opposition when protests against his rule first erupted 6 months ago. Now rebel fighters, almost none of them professional soldiers, are swarming all over his residence and the command centre at the very heart of his seat of power.
It is almost as a city. I mean, there are medical facilities, there are broadcasting facilities, there are underground bunkers, there are houses, there are offices, there are communication centers. This is really, the absolute, if one thinks of Gaddafi as an octopus with a head and multiple legs, this is really the head. This is the center of all of his intelligence, military, and also political capability. So it is extraordinarily significant.
Bab al-Azizia means splendid gate in Arabic. The compound stretches for over 2 square miles, and yet it seemed to fall with relative ease to an undisciplined and loosely affiliated group of fighters.
So I suspect a lot of people will have got out in the final hours of the fighting, and they will now be doing what? Question mark. Well, it depends again.
Those who know about urban warfare believe the rebels must have had some help.
Over the last few months, we the UK and others have been putting teams into Benghazi, mostly non-military, but some military advice as well. I think that's been very influential in preparing the campaign plan. I suspect there have been other Arab nations who've been involved. Some of them, like Qatar, have been very much involved in the air campaign and in supporting, forward-leaning in all of these areas. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if there were some special forces in the round, call them what you like, Qatari, maybe other nations, Arab nations, who come in to help in this phase.
The question now for the rebels and for NATO is how long this next phase will last. After months of stalemate or painfully slow progress, the past few days have been a real roller coaster ride, with precipitous advances by the rebels, victory seemingly almost within their grasp, only to have it snatched from them again on a number of occasions. As we speak, there are still pockets of fighting going on inside Tripoli, and that does look set to continue for a while at least. It's difficult to get a clear picture of who controls what parts of the city. Areas where recent fighting has erupted are marked here in red. But Tripoli is becoming divided, neighbourhood by neighbourhood, as residents form militias to defend their areas. But where is Colonel Gaddafi? This man, bizarrely, says he got a phone call from him today. He is Kirsan Ilumzhinov, the chairman of the International Chess Federation, who visited Libya in June as an unofficial envoy from Russia. The colonel was safe and well in Tripoli, he said. But the fact is, he hasn't been seen in public for months.
We've all learnt over the last 5 months not to place too much emphasis on any one development or one piece of news. We're in the death throes of this regime, and it's a good thing that we've reached that point and the people of Libya have fought their way to that point against violent repression from the regime. But it's still a very difficult and dangerous time. It's not over yet.
Everyone is having to learn to be cautious about their predictions in this conflict, but practically the entire country is now in rebel hands. And for the people who've been fighting this revolution since February, a mood of euphoria and of impatience is proving hard to suppress.
Well, NATO spokeswoman Una Lungescu joins us now from Brussels. Is Colonel Gaddafi in Tripoli, do you know?
I don't know for a fact where Colonel Gaddafi may be. Judging from the very brief appearance by his son at the dead of night last night, that didn't look to me as if any of the members of this family is in control of the capital or of the country or of anything much at all. But just to be clear, of course they are on the run, but they cannot hide.
But to be clear about this, well, you say they cannot hide. You're telling us that the entire military intelligence operation of the world's most powerful military alliance does not know where this man is.
Well, Colonel Gaddafi and other individuals in the regime are not targets of NATO operations. We're not targeting specific individuals.
But it's clearly relevant that you know.
Throughout this campaign, well, what I think is of utmost importance to us is our mandate under the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973, and that is to protect civilians and civilian-populated areas from attacks and the threat of attack. That is exactly what NATO has been doing very effectively.
Would it be helpful in that mission if Colonel Gaddafi was captured?
It would be very helpful if Colonel Gaddafi realized that his history, he is part of Libya's blood-splattered past, but he certainly is not part of its future. And he and the remnants of his regime must realize that this conflict must come to an end, and they must spare the Libyan people more bloodshed and more suffering. But what we have been seeing, not just in Tripoli but across the country, is that there is still some shelling, there are still attacks against civilians. Only last night we saw the launch of a Scud-type missile from Sirte, Colonel Gaddafi's stronghold, towards the city of Misrata.
Can you tell us, were there any...
rocket did not hit anything, but it still shows that they are dangerous, and so the NATO mission has to continue until our mandate is fulfilled, until the job is done, and we are fully determined to do that.
Were there any NATO forces involved in the advance on Tripoli, or indeed in the fighting in Tripoli today?
There are no NATO troops on the ground, no NATO forces on the ground. Our mission is to enforce the no-fly zone, the arms embargo, and the protection of civilians and civilian-populated areas from the air.
And there have been no airstrikes against Colonel Gaddafi's compound, we take it then?
Well, there have been a lot of airstrikes against command and control centres across Libya, including Colonel Gaddafi's compound, in the past 5 months. We've conducted some 20,000 sorties in the past 5 months, and we've struck some 4,000 legitimate military targets, and over the past 5 months, what we've done is to steadily degrade a war machine that Gaddafi had accumulated over 42 years
which included his
own people.
house, did it not?
Well, this was a command and control centre which had been struck, as I say, over the past 5 months several times. So what you see is the cumulative effect of a very effective NATO campaign.
Can you tell us how long this NATO campaign will continue?
I'm not going to guess, Jeremy, about how long this is going to continue, because, of course, Gaddafi and his regime, whatever remains of it, are unpredictable and therefore still dangerous.
But we can
what I think is important is that there is a commitment to continue implementing the UN mandate, and we will do it until the job is done.
That UN mandate is for the protection of civilians, isn't it?
Indeed. And
so therefore NATO's responsibilities...
there are still attacks and shelling.
Absolutely. And NATO's responsibilities would include protecting civilians in the event that there were any kind of mob justice, for example, in the aftermath of the collapse of the Gaddafi regime.
NATO's mandate is very clear. What is also very clear is the responsibility of the National Transitional Council to ensure that the transition towards a new Libya, towards democracy, is done not with bloodshed and violence, but through reconciliation, through peace, and through the respect of human rights and the rule of law. And what we've heard and what we've seen so far from the NTC is very welcome. We have seen a very strong commitment to that.
Can we take it that were the NTC, for whatever reason, to be unable to control mob justice taking effect, NATO would still act upon its UN mandate and protect civilians from mob justice?
We will continue, as I said, to enforce the UN mandate. Now, that UN mandate is conducted through an air operation. We will not be able to do everything in Libya from the air. That's very clear. There is a responsibility of all the forces in Libya on all sides to ensure that the transition towards a new Libya is done with full respect of the rule of law and the human rights of the Libyan people.
Una Longescu, thank you. Well, now, Jean Kretz, the US ambassador to Libya, is in Washington. Mr. Kretz, do you take it that NATO has an ongoing commitment to protect civilians in Libya now?
Well, I think until we get the definitive signs and whatever determination we make that the Gaddafi regime is finished, I think that the NATO mandate will continue.
Because there is every danger, is there not, that this could go the way of Iraq, where there is a victory over the regime and then anarchy ensues.
You know, I've heard several of our commentators throughout the past few days throughout the United States commenting on the possibility that anarchy will follow and making all kinds of speculation. Let's take a look. You know, let's give the NTC some credit. They started with zero. They inherited a situation from Gaddafi in which there were no institutions, no politics, no sense of civil society. They inherited a country that has been ruled by a man who brought the notion of divide and conquer to unprecedented heights. And they have a long road ahead of them, no doubt. But by word and deed, at least up until the current time, I think that we have to have at least some faith in them that they will be able to carry out what will be a positive transition. They certainly have done everything, as I said, to give us that certain comfort level. There's no doubt that the situation they face is going to be very complex. It's not going to be easy. Getting rid of a regime, you're not just taking down a man, you're taking down a regime that has suffocated this nation for 41 years. So let's be careful about assuming that there's going to be anarchy at this stage when we're just at the, we haven't even reached the end game yet.
Let's leave aside that very interesting comment you make about regime change there, and let's just look at the NTC, who were unable to be sure that they had Saif Gaddafi in their custody, as they claimed yesterday, and yet an hour later he popped up giving an impromptu press conference in the middle of the night. Does this seem to you to be an organisation coherently acting?
Look, let's take a look at the challenge that they've been up against all these 6 months and give them some credit for that. There's no doubt, look, in this rush into Tripoli, which really no one expected to happen so quickly, that in the fog of war, there are miscommunications, there are, missteps. They have already acknowledged that there was a misstep. They have faced it with transparency and accountability. So let's not just take one instance as symbolic of a total incompetence on the part of this council, which has done some really yeoman work in the past 6 months to get this rebellion continuing and to get them to the point where they are today.
You're in an interesting position, of course, aren't you? Because here we are seeing a man who possibly faces, if he's ever caught, the justice of the International Criminal Court. And a year ago, when you were ambassador there, he was an ally, wasn't he?
I wouldn't use the word ally. I would say that we made a determination, along with our British colleagues and other members of the international community, that it was in the international community's interest to try to bring a pariah nation that had been involved in numerous acts of terrorism and had been a real enemy to many of us during those many years, to bring them in from the cold and to try to reform them. Obviously, we made efforts in that part on that goal, but we didn't succeed to the best extent that we wanted. I wouldn't call him an ally. I would call it a positive development that we had all tried to do to bring this pariah nation and this dictator back into the international fold. We succeeded on some fronts. On some fronts, we failed.
Can I ask you one specific question? Will the United States now seek the extradition of Abdel Basit al-Megrahi?
That's a question I would refer you to our Department of Justice on.
What would you like to see happen with him?
I don't have a particular view. We're focused right now on bringing this regime to seeing the opposition bring this regime to an end, and then helping the Libyan people, setting them on the path, along with our coalition partners and the international community, setting them on a path toward the democracy and freedom that they deserve after this long, courageous, and very, very bloody struggle.
Mr. Ambassador, thanks very much. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Now, if Colonel Gaddafi hadn't been so dangerous, he'd have been merely an absurd, comical figure, a man who renamed the months of the year, published incoherent thoughts in a little green book, and ranted. But in his time, he was dangerous, shipping guns and explosives to terrorists around the world. His regime was the longest lasting in the Arab world, but he never achieved his ambition of becoming the new Colonel Nasser. He plundered his country remorselessly. Here's Paul Mason.
Muammar Gaddafi seized power in a military coup in 1969. For the era, it was an ordinary coup, but Gaddafi was no ordinary person. Scarred by the defeat of the Arab nations in the Six-Day War with Israel, Gaddafi was part of a generation of young officers determined to revolutionize the Arab world. In the early 70s, faced with internal dissent, Gaddafi created revolutionary committees. These exerted repression and surveillance into the workplace and the home. At the same time, he issued the famous Green Book, a mixture of Islam, socialism and nationalism. That was the theory. In practice, Gaddafi launched a mercurial, unpredictable and ruthless proxy war against the West that would prove impermeable to diplomacy. After an abortive attempt to torpedo the QE2, he armed the IRA, declaring IRA bombs to be Libyan bombs. He armed and sent troops to fight for Idi Amin in the 70s, and later backed the genocidal tyrant Charles Taylor in Liberia. But in the 1980s, Libya's action against the West refocused. It would be less by proxy, more by direct intervention. Libyan diplomats shot and killed PC Yvonne Fletcher in London in 1984. Libyan agents bombed a nightclub in Berlin in 1986. In response, President Reagan ordered the ill-fated airstrike on Gaddafi's Tripoli compound. The leader escaped thanks to a warning from Italian politicians. Then, on the 21st of December 1988, Libyan agents perpetrated the biggest mass murder in British history. A Pan Am flight to New York was blown up in mid-air, killing all 259 people on board and 11 in the town of Lockerbie. But history was about to change for Colonel Gaddafi. The end of the Cold War paved the way for UN sanctions, which during the 1990s began to strangle the Libyan economy. Meanwhile, the Libyan elite began to realize what luxuries might be on offer for an oil-rich country in a globalized and oil-hungry world. In 1999, Libya surrendered 2 suspects for trial over the Lockerbie bombing. One, Abdel Basit al-Megrahi, was convicted. And in 2003, After the fall of Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi made a startling U-turn. He gave up weapons of mass destruction and came in to the Western fold. On the front line of the rapprochement was Tony Blair, a key figure in the background, Saif al-Islam, Gaddafi's son. The collateral benefit for Britain was clear. Oil and trade. BP garnered a major deal. The Gaddafi clan's aim was also clear. They wanted respectability and they wanted the return of Megrahi. In 2007, in the last days of the Blair administration, they got both.
Saif is committed to resolving contentious international and domestic issues through dialogue, debate and peaceful negotiations.
Saif was feted at the London School of Economics.
In theory, Libya is the most democratic state in the world.
Megrahi was released. And then, on the 14th of February this year, history turned again. The one force nobody had counted on, not the CIA, MI6 or the LSE, the Libyan people, rose up and said no more. Tonight, the world is facing a future without Muammar Gaddafi. The man who dreamed of revolution across the Arab world finally gets to see one.
Well, with us now are the Libyan rebels man in London, Juma El-Gematy, the journalist Nabila Ramdani, who specialises in Middle Eastern and North African affairs, and the former Foreign Office Minister, Kim Howells. As a Libyan, how was it that Colonel Gaddafi was able to hold power for 40 years?
Well, combination of things. The fact that he was heading a country which is very, very wealthy. He had a lot of money. He could buy his way. He could pay for a lot of his mistakes. He used a combination of co-option and coercion. He decimated all the political opposition from very early on. He disbanded political parties. He imprisoned all political critics. And he was very, very brutal, a sheer brutal dictator.
Kim Howells, do you now find it embarrassing that your government embraced this man?
Well, I'm not sure embrace is the right word, but...
well, it was almost literally an embrace when Tony Blair shook his hand.
Well, I don't know what his personal relationship was like with Gaddafi, but I do know that it was very, very important to persuade the Libyans and persuade Gaddafi in particular to give up those programs that he had to try to develop nuclear weapons and biological weapons and so on. I mean, if that hadn't been achieved, well, one wonders what the situation would be like in Tripoli today.
This isn't going to be over, is it, Nabila Ramdani, until he is somehow captured or killed or something?
Well, absolutely. He still has a very strong base of loyalists, and we've seen how today, in fact, has captured the incredible drama of the last 6 months. It
Hang on a second. You say he's got a very strong base of loyalists. I refer you to the pictures we can see on the wall behind us, which are the scenes of jubilation in the centre of Tripoli tonight. Does that look to you like a bunch of people who are loyal to a dictator?
No, not at all, but they are also, and it is, I'm afraid, a reality, loyalists which are infiltrated within the vast majority of the Libyan populations. And we have seen, in fact, you know, when the rebels reached the Green Square yesterday, quite easily, in fact, the resurgence of very bitter infighting by snipers, pockets of resistance, and indeed, you know, ongoing battles. And this is something which is bound to be to carry on, I'm afraid.
Juma El-Gematy, how do you read that analysis?
Out of reality, out of this world, few hundreds of snipers and mercenaries does not equate to a wide base of loyalists. That is absolutely ridiculous. No, even, by the way, tonight, even Gaddafi's own hometown, Sirte, his own tribe, Gaddafi, are now negotiating to come over to the revolution, and they totally disowned him. This man has no real support or loyalists in Libya whatsoever. He has used thousands and thousands of mercenaries and snipers. We have arrested many of them, and that is where he drew his strength over the last weeks and months.
I would love Goma to be absolutely enthusiastic about you know, this revolution, and the scenes of jubilations are entirely justified tonight. But what I'm trying to say is that let's not forget that the Libyan society is deeply entrenched with all sorts of differences. tribal rivalries, geographical rivalries, ideological rivalries, and in all sorts of conflicts you have a built-up of grievances, of resentment, a desire for revenge, of retaliation, and this is not going to be sorted out overnight. Let's not forget that it's an important point to make, but the young men we have seen storming the Gaddafi compound today are in the end young men with guns, and Libya today, Libya's population today is amongst probably the most heavily armed in the world.
And one of the more youthful too.
Absolutely.
Kim Howells, if either of those things is true, we're in there for quite a long time to come, aren't we?
I think we are going to be in there for a very long time to come. I'm not sure what it's going to look like, but the most pernicious legacy that Gaddafi leaves Libya with is the lack of a viable and working political system. And so one's got to be created. And at the moment, as your other guests have said, there's a power vacuum there. There's the potential for disaster. And so I think we've got to do everything that we can to try to help the construction of a democratic system of government there that people can identify with. And that's not going to be easy, because for 42 years he's ruled it as a despot.
Juma, when you look at the National Transitional Council, does everybody on it want the same kind of Libya?
Absolutely, and those fighters as well, those freedom fighters. And there is absolutely unanimity on what type of Libya we want. We want
But unanimity beyond let's get rid of Gaddafi.
Yes, beyond. We have a vision. We have a clear roadmap. We have the determination. We want exactly the opposite of what Gaddafi stood for over the last 42 years. And by the way, the kind of divisions which Nabila just highlighted, ethnic, ideological, tribal, deep-rooted divisions, I think, you know, she's coming from a neighboring Algeria, but it shows she knows very, very little about Libya. I'm really disappointed and sorry to know that if you are an expert on Libya, you know very, very little. I think whoever pays you for your expertise, they're not getting their money's worth. Libya is the most homogeneous Arab society. We do not have any religious divisions. We do not have any sectarian divisions. We do not have any ethnic divisions.
No tribal divisions?
Sorry?
No tribal divisions?
No, the tribes of the few tribes.
No divisions even between dissidents in both the West and the East? Isn't it true that your headquarters are in Benghazi and most of the fighting has been done by rebels coming from the West?
That's totally been exaggerated and inflated. The people of the East are the most determined people that Libya will be a united country with Tripoli as the capital. Tribes in Libya are a social institution rather than a political institution.
Okay.
You know, we are not Iraq, we are not Somalia, we are a totally different society. We are homogeneous in North Africa and a Mediterranean society.
Let her have a
Of course.
First of all, Guma, with all due respect, your comments towards me are very much a cheap shot, I have to say. And what you have been saying about the composition of the Libyan society exposes your utter ignorance or your denial of Libyan history, I'm afraid to say.
Ignorance of my own country?
but you're in denial. You are absolutely in denial.
I'm not in denial. I am a realist.
We have seen the revolution starting in Benghazi in the east of the country. The group which proved to be the most challenging to the Gaddafi regime came from the southwest, and we are already seeing conflicts and all sorts of conflicts between the rebels themselves, people who are fighting on the same side against Gaddafi, saying the southwest, the rebels in the southwest are now claiming to have done most of the fighting and hence should be in charge of the country. They are already vying.
There has been no fighting in the southwest.
The
southwest
oil revenues.
What are you talking about? There has been no fighting in the southwest as much as in the east and the west and northwest.
You're saying that there is no guarantee at all that there will be any kind of amity once Gaddafi is finally got rid of, that it will be very hard to make any kind of political consensus?
Absolutely. I think what has undone the Gaddafi regime ultimately is a combination of NATO air power and rebel forces fighting on the ground. And there's no guarantee that the rebels will come to a unanimous decision as to who should run Libya. And let's not forget that ultimately Libya is a fairly recent creation, and there's no guarantee that it will remain a single entity.
Kim Howells, it's unarguable that before NATO intervened, the rebels were on the run. That was why NATO intervened. NATO has made this. Does it not have a responsibility somehow to continue to make sure it has a peaceful end?
Well, I'm not sure, because the great fashion now, of course, is to ensure that the UN and the Arab League backs everything. I think one of the things that comes out of this Libyan, these extraordinary things going on in Libya, is how useless the Arab League is. I mean,
tell us something new.
Well, it's got to be repeated. Only one country, Qatar, sent any planes in to help, and apparently they ran out of fuel and they weren't used.
Including munitions.
And I think it's extraordinary that people believe that there aren't going to be any problems in the future. I think all of these dictators in the Middle East are going to be dreadfully worried about what they're seeing going on in Libya tonight.
OK, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you. Well, with its leader now AWOL, but certainly not in control, the plan is for the so-called National Transitional Council to pave the way for a democratically elected government. But the chaos of regime change can also leave a vacuum capable of being filled, as it was in Iraq, by extremist groups. NATO have already observed so-called flickers of Al-Qaeda in the rebel group. We'll discuss the potential risks ahead in a moment, but first here's Robin Denslow.
Gaddafi loved the desert, and he used his massive oil wealth to expand his influence from Libya to surrounding desert states and across Africa. He was a mercurial, pragmatic leader, apparently devoid of too many principles, but there was one constant: his opposition to Islamic groups, like the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, who were determined to overthrow him. Now, with Gaddafi's rule at an end, it's argued that Islamic groups will try to assert their influence.
They were working for the overthrow of Gaddafi for 2 to 3 decades, and now I guess they feel they're going to be in an extremely strong position, and they will be pushing for their own role within the Transitional Council.
Gaddafi played many different roles on the international stage. When I met him, or at least managed to get close to him with the Newsnight team back in 2002, he was being courted by the British government, and I was assured that the man once seen as a sponsor of terror had changed his ways. Britain argues that this is the way forward. This is a new Gaddafi. But there are a whole raft of issues still to be discussed. It seems that as part of the rehabilitation process at that time, Gaddafi was actually keen to offer the West information about Islamist groups. Though whether his information was taken seriously is another matter.
I think it was a rather curious relationship that Gaddafi wanted to be accepted again in Western countries, and he was viscerally anti-Al-Qaeda, and so wanted to provide information to our security services on Al-Qaeda. But remember, this is the man who'd funded the IRA, who was behind the Red Army faction and the Red Brigade and some of the Palestinian groups. I think it would be extremely unlikely that our security services would have taken what he said particularly seriously. I'm sure they would have been interested to hear whatever he had to say, but I think they'd have taken it with buckets of salt.
For much of his career, Gaddafi's main obsession was Africa. He wanted to use his power and oil wealth to promote his often fanciful ideas across the continent.
There was a real push in the late 70s and early 80s to propagandize the Green Book around sub-Saharan Africa, and especially in West and Central Africa. There were a lot of so-called Green Book clubs set up. Students went out of university and were recruited by Gaddafi agents, and then they were taken for training to Tripoli and Sirte, and then inducted into the green, what he regarded as his brand of green revolution and reinterpretation of Islam.
But now it seems that his demise is going to spread unwanted repercussions among neighbouring African states. It could give encouragement to a shadowy Islamic group that's causing increasing concern to countries across the Sahara. Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb, AQIM, started in Algeria but have operated right across the vast, lawless tracts of the Sahara Desert, from Mauritania through to Mali and Niger, and the governments and intelligence agencies in all those countries have been trying to fight back with American help. Now there are fears that AQIM are going to move into Libya to try and take advantage of any power vacuum. That's certainly their intention. An AQIM video posted earlier this month called for action and included a statement from a member of AQIM's military board that seeking a peaceful change of leaders is like giving aspirin to a cancer patient. AQIM have been linked to kidnappings and attacks across the Sahara, and now it seems they will try to take advantage of a power vacuum in Libya. But the extent of the threat they pose is a matter of debate.
They're stuck in the Sahel countries where weak governance and lack of security institutions make it reasonably easy for them to operate. But I think most of what they're doing is limited to what they can do, which is opportunistic kidnappings and the occasional raid. I question whether they have the capacity to go much beyond that.
If the National Transitional Council cannot contain things, I think AQIM is going to become much more powerful within the region. And I think that's one reason, for example, why the Algerian government was continuing to support Gaddafi, because it feared that the fall of Gaddafi's regime would open up the opportunities for smaller, nimbler groups such as AQIM to move in and run operations across the region.
Already it seems the upheavals in Libya could be helping AQIM. There are claims that AQIM have received convoys of weapons, including SAM-7 missiles plundered from Gaddafi's abandoned arm caches. Last week, police in Niger said they'd seized 60 unmarked vehicles and a dismantled helicopter that most probably came from Libya. Is this a sign that jihadists are getting more organised?
It's possible that the insecurities throughout North Africa may actually create a more organised jihadist challenge across the region, but it hasn't happened yet. And I suspect it won't, because although there's an awful lot of space in North Africa, there's a lot of places where people can hide. The societies of North Africa, whether you're talking about Algeria or Tunisia or the new Libya, are just not sympathetic to jihadism in the way that Yemen is sympathetic to jihadism, in the way that Pakistan is sympathetic to jihadism. They don't really have a sea in which to swim where the water is really warm enough for them.
Gaddafi made it impossible for Islamic groups to operate in Libya. Now it depends on the National Transitional Council to ensure that there is no power vacuum that extremists can try to exploit.
Well, with us now, Noman Benotman, a former head of the Libyan militant organisation known as the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, who resigned his position after the September the 11th attacks, and now works to dissuade his former comrades from violence. Also with us, John Hamilton, the director of the analysis group Cross-Border Information. How worried are you about the possible emergence of radical groups in Libya now?
I think the presence of the Islamists in Libya now, it's obvious and clear for everybody. But talking about like a violent radicals, I'm still not comfortable to say they are like imminent threat. There is a risk, of course, because now we have guns everywhere in the hands of very young people, including Islamists. But you mentioned like most of them they are my ex-colleagues. You know, we fought together like 20 years ago in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. We gave Colonel Gaddafi a very hard time during the 90s, and myself, I was a mediator since 2007 till 2010 for a reconciliation process, and this is the same guys now, they participating with the rebels under the leadership of the NTC. I think I'm comfortable to say, it's first-hand information, they said, we will stuck with the political process, you know, that's what they said. I trust the leaders, I would put it this way, the leaders, my ex-colleagues, but I'm not sure about the young people being now recruited to the cause recently.
How important was Colonel Gaddafi in keeping these radical groups in check?
I think the cooperation which he had with Western governments was strongly appreciated, and I've spoken to military people who've said that. And if you look at the clear relationship which someone like Musa Kusa had with our authorities, I think that demonstrates the point. But
can anyone less than a dictator achieve the same results?
Yes, I believe they can, because I think that
most of the Western countries.
I think there's what we're seeing is really a collapse of 10 years of attempting to fight Islamic extremism by supporting military dictators, and all you do is you encourage extremism. You mustn't equate the Libyan Islamists with jihadists. If they've got a chance to cooperate in their own democracies, they're going to be less inclined to come and create problems for us if we're because we're not going to be supporting their oppressors.
Yeah, I think this point is very important. You know, myself, from my own experience, you know, I would like to put it clear. I think the most successful approach now regarding fighting against terrorism and extremism, including radical violence, it's the Western approach based on liberal approach. This is the most successful one, I believe, because it's a very strategic one.
You're not saying that because you hope it's true, but you're saying that on the basis of your experience in dealing with former colleagues in these
experience, because I'm aware of what's going on in Europe and what's going on in many Arab countries. You know, myself, I have very good experience.
Why does it work?
If you see now, just let's take the UK example, you know. London, during the mid-90s, it was called like the London Stand. And it's fair, by the way. I know exactly what's going on. I know more than the people they know.
You were part of it.
Yeah, but I think, not necessarily, you know, it was against Colonel Gaddafi only. But what I would like to say, trust me on this, the British approach based on liberal values, you know, within a very open liberal society, it's very effective and useful. I can tell you. Everybody being brought to justice here in UK, if I might say, you know, and I know some people, maybe they disagree with me. They know exactly this is one of the most just system exists here in UK. That's why we have a lot of radicals in UK. They don't involve in terrorism.
And does the National Transitional Council seem to you that sort of organisation, going to create that kind of society?
That's certainly what they're saying, and
yeah, exactly.
I mean,
that's what they're saying. Yeah, I think they are genuine about that.
You know, I think they, I think the reaction from what's gone on before is going to be a very strong one, and you know, they've got every incentive to try and create a society which incorporates most of the elements that they've got. They can attempt to copy Tunisia. I mean, they're way behind, but they've got a few examples to follow.
Yeah, look, I think from my own experience, I think the British model and Netherlands, this is the most comprehensive, primitive approach based on liberal values towards like extremism, radicalism, which is very successful. I'm sure about this. I know it's very hard, really, to transfer the whole project, you know, to Libya, because we haven't got infrastructure for democracy for the last, I think, 42 years. But I believe it's doable, you know. Just we need to engage with these people. And I would like to make it clear here. The first thing we need to do, look, behave or you will be criminalized. And no one in Libya should be allowed. We need to be very firm about this, like the system here. Okay, there's a freedom, but don't try to drive like legitimacy based on your participation in the war of liberation.
Okay, thank you both very much. Well, that's all from us. Back tomorrow. Until then, good night.